Amazing. Good. Okay. Good morning. We are going to continue our discussion about bathing on Shabbos. Today we're going to talk about cold water and going to the mikvah for men, for women, and maybe we'll have a chance to start the topic of soap. We'll see how far we get. So we're on page 32. And let's jump in. So says the Shulchan Aruch in source 16. So based on everything we've been discussing, we realize the main issue with bathing has been really about hot water, right? Heating up hot water obviously is forbidden on Shabbos. Using hot water that was heated before Shabbos could run into potential issues where people either get confused or people do the wrong thing. And that was the background until now. Based on everything we've been discussing, there should be no issue with using cold water, right? Because the whole issue, everything we've been talking about until now, has been about people illegally heating up water on Shabbos, right? So says the Shulchan Aruch, based on that, harochetz benahar, a person who bathes in a river, tzarech shenagev gufo yafeh kishe'ola mehanar. It's important that you dry yourself off really well when you get out of the river. Okay, but you see that he is assuming there is no issue with bathing in a river, because what would the issue be? There's no heating element in a river, so you could go in. If it's hot, if it's cold, doesn't matter. Bottom line is, as long as there's no heating element involved, there should be no issue. His only issue is you should dry yourself off as soon as you get out. Why? Mipnei shelo yisharu hamayim alav, so that water does not remain on you. V'yitaltlem daled amos bekarmelis, and you may come to carry the water 4 amos, okay, 8 feet, in a quasi-public domain. What he's concerned about is in a situation where there is no Eruv and you are soaking with water. So, this is probably more going to, as soon as you step out of the water, certainly a woman with hair and it's like soaked with water, right? My daughters, after they put on their shirts, I look at under the bottom of their hair, it's like their whole shirt is soaked. I'm like, what is going on over here? But you're carrying a lot of water with a lot of hair, right? So the concern is that there is a concern that in certain parts of your body you'll be carrying water. There's a lot of water on your body. But if you're walking and it's raining on you, the halacha is not particular about him. In other words, this is a stringency about drying yourself off after you bathe, because when you bathe, you're really soaked in water. So the rabbis were concerned if you're going to walk into a public domain, biblical or rabbinic public domain, dry yourself off really well before you do so that you're not carrying water. Okay, the carrying piece, it is drying. Oh, we'll get to drying as well. We're going to get to drying, right? We're going to have a whole discussion about drying as well, which we're going to hold off on. But the main point that they quote this for is to tell us that according to the Shulchan Aruch, there is no issue with going into a river, right? Because what's the issue? The only issue is baths which could be heated. Baths which are heated, that's where you run into the issue. But going into a river, presumably cold water as well, there'd be no issue. However, the Truma suggestion, one of the early classical sources, writes in source 17 as follows: Mikol makom nira. Nonetheless, even though we just quoted the Shulchan Aruch and the simple, read of the Gemaras are to tell us that there is no issue whatsoever with going into unheated water or cold water, nira da'ina bizmanenu, nowadays, dekule alma zihiri shelo lirchot klal b'Shabbos. Nowadays, the minhag is not to bathe at all on Shabbos, afilu lehikar, bein benahar, bein b'mikvah, even to cool off, whether it's in a river or whether it's in a mikvah. Even though we didn't find any explicit prohibition about this, the custom is to hold back. So basically, even though if you're just to read the Gemara and close the Gemara, we'd say, okay, no bathing on hot water on Shabbos, cold water is fine. Nonetheless, the Truma and the Shulchan Aruch rules this way. The Shulchan Aruch says you're allowed to bathe in cold water. Nonetheless, the Truma Sadeshan writes that the minhag, the custom evolved that we don't bathe at all on Shabbos. Okay, so says the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah sheds a little bit of light on this in source 18. Kasvu haposkim, the authorities write, the halachic authorities write, Dinalgu shelo lirchotz klal benahar o b'mikvah. The minhag is not to bathe in a river or in a mikvah. Dimatzoi lavali de schitas se'ar. Because there's one of the things that caused this prohibition is the concern that a person may squeeze out their hair. Okay, and schita is one of the biblical prohibitions. And as you bathe yourself, as you wash yourself, there are different considerations. One of them being that as you push your hair, you're actually squeezing water out of your hair. If let's say you put shampoo on your hair similarly, and you squeeze the shampoo out of your hair, that is a form of schita. Schita is there's something trapped in a solid and you're squeezing it out. So that's one of the issues that is concerned over here. V'od kama tamim. There's other reasons as well. Okay, ayin b'magen avram. Okay, so bottom line is he says that the minhag evolved partially because of squeezing out water of your hair, and other reasons, miu yadav ragalav, Mutter lirchotz benahar, you are allowed to wash your hands and feet in a river. Kishemenagev kodem sheyelech dal ramos, as long as you dry yourself before you walk outside in the public domain. Okay, and that's how the Mishnah Berurah rules, that based on these different considerations, you cannot bathe, even though the Shulchan Aruch says you could bathe in a river, you could go into a river, the Mishnah Berurah and the normative minhag is not to do so because of a number of concerns. And source 19, a little bit further, Shmir Shabbos Kol Chaso brings this all together. He says like this: Noagim shelo lirchotz b'Shabbos u'Yom Tov es kol haguf afilu b'mayim karim. The minhag is not to wash on Shabbos or on Yom Tov the entire body, even in cold water. V'rochtzim rak es chelkei haguf she'eina mechusim sa'aros. And one could wash parts of the body as long as they're not covered in hair, because again, one of the main concerns of the Mishnah Berurah and the Magen Avraham and other sources was the concern of squeezing out your hair. Umutar lirchotz es hachalakim ha'ele b'mayim karim. You're allowed to go ahead and wash other parts of your body, not hairy parts of your body, with cold water. Or afilu b'mayim poshim shechomimu mibod yom, or even warm water that was heated legally, meaning you heated it with water that was warmed up before Shabbos. B'mida kezos shemargishim od es chom hamayim. Warm, but it shouldn't be so warm that you feel heat. So it should just be like warm enough that you take the bite out of the water. Okay, so let's just pause here for a second. Basically, what the Shmir Shabbos Kol Chaso is saying is that, again, adopting that minhag, we don't wash our entire body with cold water. You are allowed to wash your limbs, but there you're allowed to either wash with cold, or you could use hot water, but as long as it's not really, you can't feel the heat, because feeling the heat may run into some of those earlier prohibitions and restrictions that we had about potentially using any form of hot water, and therefore you could use water that was cooled off, that let's say you have cold water, you can pour some hot water into that cool water to make it not so cold. You could wash parts of your body, but not your whole body. And then he adds, someone who is uncomfortable, kigon bero yom sharav, let's say on a very hot day, mutter af lihiskaleach b'mayim ke'ela keragil b'mosachol. Okay, then you are allowed to go ahead and wash yourself off with cold water, just like you do on the weekday. Umikal makom yizar shlo lischod esasaris, as long as you're careful not to wring out your hair. So says the Shmir Shabbos Kol Chaso, why can't you take a cold shower on Shabbos and Yom Tov? Or let's say Shabbos. Okay, Yom Tov we left off the side for a second. But why can't you take a shower on Shabbos? It's a minhag. It's not even brought down in the earliest sources. The Shulchan Aruch says there's no problem. A minhag evolved because of some concerns, and therefore this minhag developed. The bottom line is, it is not, because it's a minhag, very often the assumption is that if a minhag develops, it didn't develop in circumstances where a person is in distress. And distress doesn't mean they are, in a life-threatening situation or illness, but a situation of distress, if it is a later developed minhag, the assumption is it's going to be there, and we see that even rabbinic laws, that in a situation of distress, the rabbinic law is waived. So over here, since the minhag of not bathing in cold water, or even warmed water, is only something which is a minhag which developed even after the times of the Gemara. Therefore, if a person is in a situation of distress, you walked home, you walked across town in Baltimore in a day of August. You're boiling, you're sweaty, you're disgusting, you feel disgusting, whatever. So what you're allowed to do is take a cold shower. No problem. You can take a cold shower. Be careful not to squeeze your hair, but there's no problem doing so.
So I know that there are people who swim on Shabbos.
Yeah.
They must rely on something. Is this what they're relying
on? We're going to come back to swimming in a moment. He doesn't talk about swimming, but partially. Yeah. Keep in mind, we'll come back to swimming. Let's finish all the sources and we'll come back to swimming. So let's just go a little bit further. Most people quote this leniency in the name of Rav Moshe because he also says this. In source 20, he says the same thing. He says, Minag midinasenu, shelo lirchotz b'Shabbos afil betzonein. The minag, the custom in our communities, is not to bathe ourselves on Shabbos, even in cold water. Ha'im ein liskalech betzonenim gam b'yom sharav. Does that mean that you're not allowed to shower in cold water, even on a day that is very hot? Tshuva, he answers, below tsar, unless you are uncomfortable, but absent discomfort, yesh lahachmir, we should be stringent. Af shalom etzinu b'sifrei rabbeinu min hagzeh, even though we have no explicit source in our tradition not to shower with cold water, you should be strict. Aval ken shemitzta'er michom hayom, but if you are uncomfortable because of the heat of the day, rashai lahakel, you can be lenient. Okay, so Rav Moshe, Rav Neuwirth, and Shmir Shabbos Kol Chaso both ruling that if you are uncomfortable on a hot day, you are allowed to take a cold shower. Yes.
It just seems like on Yom Tov, more people will do this, but on Shabbos, like in Baltimore, you're always uncomfortable if you walk a mile to shul, right?
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah. Yeah, but on Shabbos, but keep in mind, on Shabbos, you're going to have to be using a cold water.
Right.
On Yom Tov, you have more. The reason you'll see more people doing it, so I'll speak for it. I will take a shower on Yom Tov. I'm someone who is mifunak. I need to shower regularly. I don't know. I feel very uncomfortable if I'm not. So so on Yom Tov, I will shower, but on Shabbos, even if I'm very uncomfortable, I don't want to take a cold shower. So that's why you'll see it's more of a practical thing. But halachically, there is no difference. A person could take a cold shower 100%. I know people do. They'll I don't know. It's really hot. Yeah. Okay. So it may not be so comfortable, but the bottom line is you take a quick cold shower. I don't know. It works. Okay. But it's 100% fine. I mean, again, Shmer Shav, this is not like a matter of dispute. Again, it's important. That's why I appreciate learning this way, and not just seeing the bottom line. Allah, you appreciate that the issue of the cold water is something which is we don't even know exactly when this developed, but there was a minhag in Ashkenazi communities that developed. We don't go ahead and do so. But it's not, you can't, there's no simple explanation. In other words, schita, squeezing is a concern, but there are many times when we get things that are wet and we don't worry about schita. It's an added concern, but it's not something which we find real sources for, and that's why both Rav Moshe and others are lenient when it comes to a person being uncomfortable. However, Rav Avad Yosef, again, a Sephardic posek, writes, Mutter liskalech b'shabbos ma'im tzonanim, v'afilu kol gufo, right? So Rav Avadia, who's Sephardic, who bases his rulings primarily on the rulings of the Shulchan Aruch, he says, there's no problem. On Shabbos, if you want, go take a cold shower, even your whole body. Uvad sheyizar shelo yav l'idei schitas haser v'magevet. You just have to make sure not to wring out the hair, not to wring out the towel. But again, he's basing this on the ruling of the Shulchan Aruch. There's no issue. So he says it's best to wait a few seconds, a little bit, before you use the towel, so your body, you shake your body off, dry off a little bit, and then you use it. Okay, bottom line is the water drips away, and then you could dry gently. You shouldn't wring out the water in your hair or on the head or on your beard, for those who have beards, because of that same issue of schita. But the bottom line is, again, according to the Rav Avadia, he says there's no problem. It is not a Sephardic minhag not to shower in cold water. Ashkenazim have the custom not to wash themselves in cold water in rivers. And because of this, they also refrain themselves from bathing in a bath or in a shower. In a situation, even for Ashkenazim, where there is discomfort or there is sweat. There is, to be lenient, to wash oneself with cold water. As long as you're careful not to wring out the hair and the towel. Okay, so bottom line is, there you have it. Sephardim, no problem washing themselves in cold water. Ashkenazim, the minhag is not to, but if you are uncomfortable, you are allowed to do so. Okay, so let's talk about pools. Pools. So the Gemara does already have a decree about going into water that doesn't have a lip. So to go into the ocean on Shabbos has its own restriction. It's based on a number of factors, but to go into the ocean, a large lake would have its own restriction. It's built around primarily around potentially building a boat. It may seem a little stretched, far-fetched, but the bottom line is, our approach to these things is that two things. First of all, sometimes our sages will mention one reason. There may be other reasons as well. That's not what's mentioned. The other factor that we keep in mind is that we simply don't have the ability to legislate against that legislation. In other words, we don't have the ability, even if someone say, well, nowadays no one builds boats. Who in the world, even if somebody's built a boat, maybe like a paper airplane, a paper boat, but like, who builds boats? This is ridiculous. Doesn't matter. We don't have the ability to upend a restriction. Because there's no Sanhedrin. Yeah. And bottom line is, we're stuck. This is one of the reasons, if you feel like, halacha is sometimes too stringent, sometimes we could say, that's part of the flaw of, part of the issue of not having Mashiach is that we don't have a Sanhedrin to turn to, and there are certain things Sanhedrin, I would assume, would be lenient about when Mashiach comes.
Are there takanos that were made batal?
It's a little bit more of an involved. Short answer, the answer. Anything that's rabbinic from the Gemara, D'Rabbanan, no. There are things which we had a discussion earlier about, let's say, like bathing. So that wasn't. We're not going to be. So one approach of not being lenient against the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan explain this is the reason it's not common. Well, now it's common. Therefore, we're not changing anything. It just doesn't apply anymore. Or you have, let's say, decrees like which are made with a time lapse, like.
So why can't you say that about both?
Because the point is, it's not like the reality is there. They say, don't do it, you might build a boat. Okay. We'll say, well, I'm not going to build a boat because nowadays, that doesn't matter. There they say, you can shower every day because it's not considered a common practice. but it is a common practice. That's a very different type of change. Okay. Bottom line is, in a pool though, that issue doesn't exist. Okay. Nonetheless, of course, you still have the issue of if there's no eruv and you go into the pool, you still have the issue that the Shulchan Aruch brought in, that you might be carrying a lot of water. There is that other concern of wringing out things, which led the Ashkenazim to go ahead and say, even if something is heated up before Shabbos, and even nonetheless, the Ashkenazi custom is we don't take, unless a person is in excessive distress, whatever, not excessive, but a person is in distress, otherwise you wouldn't go into a cold shower on Shabbos. Similarly, the same way we wouldn't go into a cold shower on Shabbos unless we were in a situation of discomfort. Similarly, we wouldn't go into a pool unless you're in a situation of discomfort. Okay? There's another factor which is always a little bit hard to pin down, and that is something called uvda dechol, which means basically what we loosely translate as not Shabbosdik. Okay, which is sometimes we see that a little bit cynically, but the Gemara already has this concept that there are things which are seen as so different than the spirit of Shabbos that therefore they become forbidden. So I don't know, is skiing usher on Shabbos? I don't know, you're moving the snow in a different fashion. Is it usher on Shabbos? I don't know, maybe yes, maybe no, the eruv, whatever. Probably, technically not, but would everyone agree that if I spend my entire day skiing on Shabbos, that flies in the face of the spirit of Shabbos? We'd all say yes, that's not, So similarly, that, where do you draw the line on those things is a matter of discussion, but the bottom line is, there are those who apply that to a pool as well. So, bottom line is to go into entire pool, that would be against the Ashkenazi custom. Like, to go swimming would go against the Ashkenazi custom. Because of the same, we wouldn't take a cold shower. There is the uvda dechol issue you have to deal with. There is the schita issue you have to deal with. Also, to keep in mind, if you're taking laps, you're doing things like that, then you run into an exercise issue, which is also another discussion around Shabbos, which has its own.
So I hear everything you're saying. I'm wondering what these people rely on.
So they're relying. Well, first of all, it's a Sephardic custom, meaning
Not
Sephardic.
Sephardic.
Okay, so it's
saying.
not. I don't know of any. Let me say it like this. I don't know personally. I don't know of any Ashkenazi posuk which would say it's mutter. I don't. Could I say it? But I don't know any Ashkenazi posuk would say it's asur gamur. They'd say that's not our custom. It's not asur. It's not. You're not going against the Durabanan, but you are going against the normative minhag Ashkenaz. Yeah, but I don't know personally of any Ashkenazi posuk that would say it's mutter.
In LA, huh?
Even in LA, where there's maybe more of a little bit more of a discussion if put your feet into the pool. Okay, then you run into if the whole issue is part of the isser of bathing your body. Okay, so if you just put your feet and your hands into the pool, it might be okay. To publicly go ahead like I just did and say it on a video is probably not a good idea because then I put my foot in, I put my leg in, I put my head in, I lift my hair out. Okay, shkayak. It's not a good idea. So I don't recommend it. Person's stuck in a situation, their kids are losing their mind. I'm like, put your feet in. Okay, put your feet in. Not part of the decree. The decree was not to go swimming. Okay, fine. Let's talk about a mikvah, right? We have to distinguish when we talk about a mikvah between two types of mikvah attendants. One is a mikvah for men who typically will go to the mikvah on a regular basis. There are many men who will go, let's say they're Hasidim. It's a typical Hasid, fairly common Hasidic minhag to go to a mikvah on a daily basis. And of course, there is a woman going to the mikvah, which is an obligation as opposed to a custom. So it says the Shulchan Aruch, Adam mutter lidval mitumasa b'Shabbos. A person is allowed to immerse due to ritual impurity on Shabbos. Okay, and that is allowed. Now the Gemara in Beitza actually says a very interesting thing. It says you are allowed to immerse yourself as an individual on Shabbos. You're not allowed to immerse a utensil on Shabbos. Let's say you bought a new metal whatever cup, and you want to go and immerse it in the Kalim mikvah on Shabbos. Asr, can't do so. And the Gemara in Beitza says, wait, what's going on? A person is allowed to. Right? Let's say we're going. Let's bring ourselves back to the ancient world. Even so, there's a person comes into contact with a corpse. Okay, so you're tummy. You're literally tummy over there. So the only way to remove that tuma is to go ahead and immerse in a mikvah. And you change your status, all right? Utensil, you buy a utensil from the store, and it has it's not kosher to use, and then you go and immerse it, and now it's kosher to use, and that you can't do. What's going on? Why a person changes their status is that not a problem. When it comes to a utensil, it's not allowed. So says the Gemara in Beitza, 23. My taima, what's the reason for this distinction? Rava Amar b'pnei nira kimisakin kli. So it looks like even though the utensil, I bought a metal utensil from the store on Friday. I didn't have a time to go to immerse it before Shabbos, but on Shabbos I go ahead and do so. It appears as if I'm fixing the utensil because I'm transforming its status, right? It was not able to be used, now it could be used. Now, even though physically there is no change in the item, but it looks like I'm fixing something. So ask the Gemara, Ihachi Adam Nami, if that's the case, then a person also should not be allowed to go to a mikvah because it looks like you're fixing something. So the Gemara says, Adam Nira Kemekar. For a person, it looks like they're just cooling themselves off, right? You could just be taking a little bath. And therefore, meaning a utensil, to dip a utensil in a mikvah, like that makes, like, why would you dip something into a big pool of water? That's not something you would normally do. And therefore, the only thing that this looks like, the only thing that this is fixing something. It looks like, again, obviously you're not practically fixing something. It's only happening on a metaphysical level. But the point is that it still appears as if you're fixing something. When it comes to a person, everyone can say, yes, it could be perceived as fixing yourself, changing your status. But also someone would say, oh, maybe this person just taking a dip to cool off. And therefore, there is no issue in doing so. Okay, so that's where the Gemara leaves it, that a person is allowed to go to a mikvah on Shabbos. Let's go a little bit further into some of the modern authorities. Source 24, this is again Rav Avadia. Yeah.
Really random. Is that why there's no weddings on Shabbos? Because you're changing status?
No, it's more to do with the kinyanim. It's more about, like, there's acquisitions that are taking place that can't be done on Shabbos. Yeah. Okay, Yalkid Yosef, source 24. Mutter litval b'mayim tzonin b'Shabbos. Person's allowed to go to a mikveh that is cold on Shabbos. Ach yizaher shelo yava lidei schitas haseir. Again, you should make sure not to squeeze out your hair. We keep on hearing that. Ach b'mayim poshrim nachom lahachimir shelo litval b'Shabbos. It's proper to be stringent not to go to a mikveh that has warm water. V'adif shelo yitval b'chlal b'Shabbos. And he says, truth is, he says, at the end of the day, it's better not to go to a mikveh at all. He's referring to men over here, men who are not obligated to go to a mikvah, and he says it's better that men do not go to a mikvah at all on Shabbos. Masher yachnis atzmo b'chshash iser shvus biglal minhag tov. It's better to stay away from going to a mikvah at all because, yes, it's a nice minhag, but you could run into rabbinic violations. In other words, don't go ahead and, potentially violate rabbinic, these violations of desecrating Shabbos for the sake of this minhag. V'shev al tasa adif, better not to do anything at all. In other words, he says, listen, all things equal, okay, so you have a minhag to go daily to the mikvah. But going to the mikvah, again, we're talking to a man over here. Going to the mikvah is a minhag. It's a custom. Nowadays, for a man to go to the mikvah, it's only a custom. So to do that for a minhag, where you could go ahead and be in violation of, wringing out your hair, etc., which are violations of Shabbos, better not to do so. Nonetheless, don't protest against those who are lenient and do so. Okay, so basically he says, better not to go to a mikvah for this reason. Okay, then he says further, source 25, the Be'er Halacha, he writes, "V'da'od dimutar gamor." If a person is ritually pure, v'rotza litval b'Shabbos b'shachris mishum tosefes kedusha, and a person wants to go to the mikvah on Shabbos for just added sanctity, ein bazeh mishum michshash misakin. Again, like we saw in the Gemara, there is no concern of repairing because that we don't see that way. Ach lefi mashakasa maharil. Nonetheless, what the Maharil wrote, "Diyafen ohegas anashim she'enan tovlos shelo bizmanan mishum chshash schita." The women had the minhag when they would not be going to the mikvah on their exact date that they had to go to the mikvah. They would not go on Friday night because of the concern that they may squeeze out their hair. Nira degam tefila kazu yesh limnoa. This tefila, the immersion of a man who's doing it just for a minhag, also should restrain himself, should not go. We're lenient enough that we allow immersion when it has to be done. Okay, so what he's saying is like this. He's saying that there is that sometimes there is a minhag brought down by the Maharil that women who are going to the mikvah, when it's not the night they would have to go, they got delayed for some reason, then they wouldn't go, and then let's say they're supposed to go to the mikvah on Thursday nights, something came up, they didn't go. Now the next time available is Friday nights. So the Maharil brings down a minhag that you don't go then because it's not really the time to go. Okay, and you would push it off. Why? Because you don't really have a full-fledged mitzvah to go on that night because it's not the night they were supposed to go, and therefore you have this concern. You have to weigh the value of going to the mikvah, weigh that with the concern of squeezing out your hair. Better to push it off to Saturday night, to Motzei Shabbos. He says if that's the case, we're telling this to women who have much more of an obligation. So for sure, for a man who doesn't really have an obligation, you should not do so. You should not do so. Okay, and that's what he brings down as, again, so you see another source saying, don't go to the mikvah, even if you have this Hasidish minhag, don't go to the mikvah on Shabbos because at the end of the day, it's just a minhag, and you're flirting with all these potential violations. With me? Yeah? Makes sense? So basically it says not to do it. However, if you turn to page, to source 27, I'm just going to skip 26 for now. Turn to page, source 27, the Karban Nesanel, one of the great authorities of the 18th century, writes as follows. Uve'ikar hadin. The main halacha is, kasafti ba'arichos, I wrote at length, shetvilas me mikvah bechamin, that even going to a hot mikvah, lo have bechlal gzeres merchatzos, was never included in the decree of the bathhouses. So he says, whoa, what are you doing over here? Everyone is coming along and saying, okay, well, we have a decree in general not to go to hot water. Even cold water, we're only going to be lenient. Even there's concerns, and therefore, basically, don't go to the mikvah on Shabbos at all. Okay, the Karban Nesanel says, whoa. This whole thing started because of a decree against going to places, going to bathhouses where people are going to manipulate things, heat it up illegally, etc., etc. Says the Karban Nesanel, that was only for, rishus. Those are only for things which are permissible. When it comes to mitzvah, when it comes to anything which is mitzvah-oriented, like going to the mikvah, this decree never applied. And you could even go to a bathhouse, you can even go to a mikvah which heats the water up before Shabbos and uses hot water elements. No issue. The whole issue of hot water, all of that, all those decrees, all stem from a decree which was limited to situations which were seen as neutral situations, non-mitzvah situations. A person just wants to bathe themselves on Shabbos situations, but the decree never applied to going to the mikvah. Okay?
He says mitzvah, he's not talking few.
He's not talking about absolute chiyuv. He says in general, anything which is, yes, he's using the word mitzvah in a very broad sense. That's right. Okay, so how do we rule? Okay, however, not all Ashkenazi poskim like this. If you look at source 28, says the Aruch HaShulchan, V'leilech lemikvah be'erev Shabbos mishechashecha aser, to go to the mikvah on Friday night when the mikvah is hot. It's forbidden. Because washing your body in hot water is forbidden, right? The Aruch HaShulchan is writing in a time before electricity. So let's say a person wants to go to the mikvah on Shabbos. So when's it going to be hot? It's going to be hot only when Shabbos begins, because as the day continues, it's going to not be so hot. It's forbidden because of the gezerah merchatzos, because of the decree that we spoke about the other week. Nesar el yirshir kiposhrin o chamtzas. He would be allowed to go if it's warm or just a little hot. The prohibition is only when it's truly hot. So let us only when it's really hot. If it's not really hot, then it's just considered warm. So Aruch HaShulchan, one of the other great Ashkenazi authorities, says that even to go to the mikvah as a mitzvah, meaning a woman to go to the mikvah on Friday night, he says she cannot go in hot water. Why? Because of the fact that the prohibition of merchatzos, he understands that even going to the mikvah would be considered part of the decree of not going to a bathhouse, and you're not allowed to go into hot water, even if the hot water was heated up legally. You can't do so on Shabbos, and therefore he says even to go to the mikvah, it should be warm water and not hot water. Yes. It's not what he says. One could have made that argument. Yeah, mikvah, like of all places, people are going to go ahead and mess. He's not coming from that angle. He's saying just simply it just was never part of the decree, and therefore it's going to be allowed. Okay, fine. So, okay, says this Mishnah Berurah, source 29, B'chamei ha'or, lefikach, therefore, b'makom shenogin lahachem ha'mikvah, in a place where they have the custom to heat up a mikvah, tzarach lizar shelo yerak poshrin, it has to only be warm, not hot, de'im lav kain, if not, aser litvol bo. He rules more stringently, not like the Karban Nesanel, and says that if it is hot water, even if it was heated legally, it is forbidden to use that water. Okay, so let's just pause here for a second just to appreciate. We're conflating a few things. So I just want to pause for a second, take a step back. There is a woman going to the mikvah. There's a man going to the mikvah. A woman going to the mikvah is a mitzvah, chiyuv, obligation. Man going to the mikvah, chassid going to the mikvah, that is a custom. So obviously that's going to be in a lower category. So let's talk about a woman going to the mikvah. So we have the Karban Nesanel saying, okay, there was never any prohibition. The whole prohibition of using hot water that's heated legally was only in a neutral setting, but not in a mitzvah. And therefore, a person is allowed to go ahead and use a mikvah. Both a woman going to the mikvah as well as a man going to the mikvah, both totally permitted. No issue whatsoever. It was never part of the gezerah merchatzos. Okay, and and that's one approach. Then you have most of the Ashkenazi poskim actually saying, no. You can't do so. The Aruch HaShulchan, the Mishnah Berurah, these are two of our main authorities saying that at the end of the day, if it is hot water, that's actually part of the gezerah. And therefore, both a woman and certainly a man cannot use a hot mikvah on Shabbos because at the end of the day, there is a gezerah merchatzos, there's the decree of the bathhouses, and this is included just because it's a mitzvah. This exclusion, who says? The Carbon Styles right in this 18th century. Who said no such exception? And therefore, you are not allowed to go into a hot mikvah, both a woman and certainly a man. You would not be allowed to do so on Shabbos. Yes?
Just practically speaking, who wants to dunk in boiling hot water? Like, I mean, I understand the shower, but like, who wants to go to a bathhouse? Like, I don't know.
Good.
It seems like a
Good.
practical thing. Most mikvahs are going to be warm.
Okay, so let's talk practically now. Let's apply this practically. So, like this, we have basically, you have these two sources, you have these two approaches, right? How do we actually rule? So, there are many mikvos, especially in Israel, which are going to have not such hot water, like warmish water on Friday night, okay? That is what they're going to do, and they're going to have warmish water because even though the Aruch HaShulchan said, as long as it's not Yad Suledes Bo, some say, no, hot water is hot water, and therefore even if it's not, right, as Yael's pointing out, boiling water, most people are not going to go into water that you recoil when you go into. Most normal people, I'm sure the people here want it, whatever.
You don't like dunk your whole, a hot tub, you go in slowly.
Yeah, exactly. Most people don't want a boiling water. So okay, we'll come back to the Aruch HaShulchan in a second. But there are those who, based on these rulings, say, hey, listen, anytime there's going to be hot water there, it's going to be forbidden, and therefore it has to be like really warm water to go to the mikvah, and there'll be many mikvos which use warm water on Shabbos. Okay? That's one approach based on the more stringent view, I would say not even stringent, the more normative views who said hot water is included in the decree of merchatzos, and therefore it cannot be done. Yes?
When you say warm water, do you mean lukewarm?
I mean lukewarm. Yeah. Like coldish warm, like basically not hot water. You shouldn't feel hot at all, and that is the simple read of the Aruch HaShulchan, the Mishnah. Forget the Aruch HaShulchan. The Mishnah Berurah is it should not be hot at all. Okay, and that is basically again their rationale is just like you don't take a hot bath on Shabbos. You don't take and even though you use water from your urn, etc., it's forbidden rabbinically. So too, you don't go to the mikvah with hot water, and therefore they would use lukewarm water. There are others in the opposite extreme who say, no, we have this carbon esanel, and therefore you could use even piping hot water, because as long as for a mitzvah purpose, it's never included, and that's certainly true for women to go to the mikvah, and even you have situations where you have Hasidim who rely on the carbon esanel to go into a hot mikvah on Shabbos, and they're relying on this carbon esanel and basically saying you go to a full hot mikvah, and therefore and there'd be no issue. It doesn't matter how hot it is, totally fine. And then you have, hold that thought for a second, then you have somewhere in the middle. I believe what Reb Heinemann does over here is he uses this Aruch HaShulchan. And he says, okay, we have to measure the temperature to make sure that it's not really hot, and I think they lower the temperature a little bit for Friday, not much. My understanding is it's not enough that it's like, I'm freezing. It's okay. They lower the temp, they cool it off a tiny bit to make sure it doesn't get to that measurement of really, really hot. But basically, somewhere in the middle, going with the Aruch HaShulchan, it's not boiling, it's not as hot as it usually is, it's a little cooler, and that I believe is that's what's done over here. And there are many other communities which do the same thing, that for most people, if they don't know the background, they wouldn't even think about it. It's okay, the water's a tiny bit cooler today, but they're not even thinking about it. That is done, that's practiced in many places, certainly in America, where they'll go somewhere in the middle, not hot, not cold or not lukewarm, but somewhere in the middle, not uncomfortable, but not as comfortable as usual. Good? Those are the different applications, okay? So again, so I would say, for a person say, once in a while, like a kid will ask me, or a teenager will ask me, I'm really uncomfortable today. I don't want to take a shower because I'm not supposed to take a shower. Let me go to the mikvah, because I see all the Hasidim go to the mikvah. So the answer to that is that, again, we saw many opinions saying no man should go to the mikvah. Even if it is your minhag, should be going, and there's a good reason not to. But even if, the poskim mostly say, if it's your minhag to do it every single day, then, to go Shabbos. But if it's not really your minhag, and you're saying, I'm going to the mikvah because it's a nice thing to do, I want to go to the mikvah because I'm just uncomfortable, and I want to take a bath, and it's nice warm water over there, even though it's a little dirty, potentially, then bottom line is that is not an allowance. It's only, we're talking about Hasidim who are going daily, then they could also go on Shabbos. But just to go because, it's this lenient thing, that's not allowed. Yes?
I guess I have a question about the mikvahs in Israel that are more machmir. If they're going to be more machmir to the point that people are going to be uncomfortable going to the mikvah on Friday, wouldn't that be like a wave of values?
Yeah, it's a schar b'efsedo. Yeah.
I like that bat mitzvah thing.
I'm just wondering.
I hear. I don't live in Israel, thank God. I mean, for that reason. No, for that reason. There are a lot of minhagim. Yeah, listen, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, look, again, they're coming from, you go through these sources, right, and we only saw a smattering of them. The carbon esanel is the outlier, right? Let's keep in mind, meaning...
What about the Aruch HaShulchan? I feel like he's very clear. He says, that's really hot. That's
okay,
not,
the Aruch HaShulchan also, but again, Mr. These are...
Most poskim
They say it's hot. They say hot. Just like on Shabbos, we want to do it. So again, it's not like they're not like judging between two equal things. Okay, there's been our minhag, and let's be honest. First of all, keep in mind, your great grandmothers, they did not exactly go into these like spa-like hot mikvahs. They went into cold water. That's what they did. So this is the minhag Yisrael. Okay, let's just see quickly washing a baby. It doesn't come up so much, but let's see this inside, and then I think it doesn't make sense to start the soap topic, so we'll just wrap up with this. So says the Mishnah Masechah Shabbos, marchitzin es hakatan bein lifnei hamila uvein la'achar hamila. You're allowed to bathe a baby before the circumcision and after the circumcision. Okay, back in the day, it was understood there was a medical belief. That was meaning not a Jewish belief, this medical belief that if a person is going to be circumcised, it's critical that they get bathed. That was understood. Okay, we understand that there's no such need medically, but this was an understanding of the universal understanding, and therefore you're allowed to do so. He says specifically on the third day you're allowed to do so. When they were in pain. Okay, so the bottom line is, this is referring to washing children because of bris milah. Says the Shulchan Aruch, Bizman Chachmei Gemara, in the time of our sages, Im lo hayirochnes of Vlad, if they wouldn't wash the child lifnei milah la'achar milah, before or after the bris milah, uviyom shlishi, and on the third day lemilah b'mayim chaim, hayimasukan, it was dangerous. Whether it was actually dangerous or was understood to be dangerous, it doesn't matter. That was the medicine of the time. Lefikach nisku lichtov mishpato k'shechal yos b'Shabbos. That's why the Gemara had to spell out that when the day falls out on Shabbos, you're allowed to wash the baby. Va'ino lo nagu b'rechitza klal. Nowadays, it is the minhag is not to wash the baby at all. And therefore, if you want to wash a baby, it's no different than any other person. There's no special danger involved. However, turn to source 33 on the next page. However, if there is bathing which is necessary for the health of a child, kigon shalulun lioslo giruyim beor machmasazeh. There's going to be some irritation based on sweat, or some other reason. The baby's dirty in a certain way that it's going to cause some issues. Yesh lahakel lerochza b'chamin. You could be lenient to wash the baby in heated water. Uvavaj leichshash isser malacha berchitzazu. Just make sure you don't run into any violations. Vim Shabbos yom fine. Bottom line is the Orcha Shabbos brings down that for a child, and this is a general rule for a child. This is not unique to bathing. General rule for a child is that we have a lot of leniencies for young children. We treat them basically as if they're ill. And remember, we had earlier that when it comes to the
How young is young?
it's a good question. I think they typically say like 5 and under, like under 6. They talk about sometimes making exceptions. But certainly like infants and toddlers are going to be included in that age. So basically, but again, if they're going to be very uncomfortable or certainly if they're going to lead to an illness, but basically young children are treated like they are ill in general. And therefore, there's something that's going to cause them great discomfort, we would waive. This is why it's important to have the background. The whole idea of not bathing a child in warmed up water. We're not talking about turning on the hot water on Shabbos. We're talking about take water from the urn, pour it into a cup, and then pour it into cold water in a tub. So you have like one of those baby tubs, right? So you put some cold water in, you took some water from your urn in your cup, poured it in. Now it's nice warm water. It's fine. Bottom line is you make sure you don't do schita. They don't have much hair anyway, so it's not so much of a concern.
You can use a towel to wash them, meaning that's the one that
you can't use a towel to scrub them.
You can't use a washcloth.
Right, you can't use a washcloth. You can't use a washcloth, but you can use your hands. You put the shampoo on. They have like no hair. Their hair is like the same amount of hair you have on like, I don't know, your finger. What's it called? Whatever. Depends on the baby, I guess. Okay, fine. But that's true. I take that back. Bottom line is it would be allowed to be done because of the fact that we treat them like they're ill. And therefore, even if there's some discomfort, it would be allowed to be done. Okay, the soap is really a whole new topic. Let's pick up on that.